All right, another class, another day. Um, this is Practical Programming. It is the Zero to Hero guide to becoming a developer. I'm glad to see everyone brought their laptops. Lots of people have their laptops. We're going to be using them a lot today. Lots planned today. There's a lot to do. There's going to be a lot of typing. So I hope everyone just can follow along. I hope the text is readable. But if it's not, you can always watch these online, and the text is really readable there. So let's get the computers fired up, which is not a problem. Everyone's got adequate power. That's what I like to hear, 100%. Shout out to Steven, who's not here today. He comes and goes, but Steven helped me think of what to do for this class. It's always a little bit hard thinking about what it is, like what exactly would be a really great next step for everyone. And Steven really helped me. He's at Steven Davis 89 on Twitter. Shout out, maybe gets a follower or two. I wondered what the 89 was, but that's his high score on Flappy Bird. It's a good dad joke. I'm good at those. So let's review for a hot second. In 2 short classes that we've had, what have we done? We've kind of done a lot for some people. Some people knew a lot coming in, so we haven't done that much. But by now, what I would hope that everyone has are projects. A project that you're thinking about doing, something that kind of interests you, something that you could apply your programming skills to as we go along, something that maybe could be completed in parts. It's not an all or nothing kind of thing. And I've had a lot of people email me different projects, and they're all really great. So everyone should be very confident in your project choices. And the good news is that all of them are actually pretty online with what we'll be doing in the class. So it's good to hear that everyone is kind of wanting to do something that fits in line with the course. And but if you have something that you want to do that's harder, you can always just email me, and I'd be happy to lend a hand wherever I can. So as far as the projects, that's great. It's been great getting emails and tweets. And the next thing that everyone should have is a pretty basic understanding of HTML syntax. And that's what we went over last Thursday. And I tried to condense it all into one slide. And this is what I got, which was just actually one of the slides from the last class. But just as a quick review, this should look familiar. This is just a basic set of tags, an opening and closing tag. Everyone should remember, but you have all tags starting with angle brackets. You have the tag name, which is in this case P, which stands for paragraph. In between the opening and closing tags are the tag content. And the closing tag always ends or begins with a /. And that's how you know that it's a closing tag. One thing that everyone might be thinking is, but what about making something larger than one tag? It's a little bit tough to really just see one tag and understand the syntax and then have a really good feel for, oh, well, how would I go about making an actual page? Because having tags in the context of a document is something that we would probably need to see, which is why I hope this shows up. Yeah, it'll show up on the projector. Today, we're going to be marking up a larger page, and I was like, well, what could we mark up? What would be a good thing to do? And I asked people for blogs, suggestions, and I came up with a thought catalog article. It has some interesting aspects to it. There are images, there's titles, there's different kinds of like aspects to the document that it would be a little bit challenging to think, well, how can we give this meaning? And with that, let's go to practicalprogramming.org. The first link should be to a CodePen page, and it has what we're going to be working with. All right. That link is on there. I always schedule that post to go at 9:30 on Tumblr, and I'm like, I wonder if it's really going to schedule. Is it the right time zone? Okay, so if you go to that link, you'll be shown the CodePen interface. If I were you, I would probably just make the CSS and JavaScript windows go away and give yourself a lot of room to work with in the HTML pane. And you should see that we're starting with a lot of unformatted text. And it's actually pretty ugly. I mean, it's tough for me to discern meaning in this page. Although I will say that I formatted it kind of nicely in the HTML section so that you guys could see it. That was for your benefit. So one of the things that we should do first, and this process is a little bit different than when you're creating your own stuff, because when you're creating your own stuff, there's nothing there that exists for you to look at and say, oh, well, you know, what is this, what is that? But we're going to start by identifying content blocks. And I guess this would be useful if you were, if you had, like a mock-up, like a Photoshop mock-up, or even a sketch or something, and you were like, well, how would I build this? Well, what I would first start doing is looking at large blocks of content and figure out what the structure of your page is going to look like. And going back to this thought catalog article, there are two major blocks of text that I really see. And even if you think about it logically, how does this page break down? At least in this screenshot, there's actually some stuff down here that we're not going to talk about. But this page breaks down into one big header at the top and then the page. And those are two really big content blocks. And so moving forward, we're going to look at the header. And so you have these two major content blocks, and one thing that you need to start thinking is, okay, well, how do things break down into smaller sections? And there's the big block. And you'll kind of see, I don't know if it's easy to see here in the slides or not, but there is a border at the bottom. There was a border. It may not be there anymore on this projector. But anyway, there's a border at the bottom, so it kind of helps to make the header even more its own block. But the header can further be broken down into two other sections that I see, and one is this top left section, which is the thought catalog name and brand. And you also have the section on the right, which is the latest thought that they always show at the top of the page. So part of, I guess, the first part of tackling the challenge of marking up a document is breaking things down into sections that we can chew on. So for now, we're going to focus on the top left section, which is the thought catalog branding, and this about and Twitter link. So if you go to the CodePen, you should already be there. But I've taken out the text, the relevant text for the header section. And this includes the thought catalog branding and the Twitter and about, and then the thing on the right as well. But we're going to focus on the top. So I've done a little formatting, and it kind of makes this pretty obvious. But the first thing that we're going to look at is what exactly are we going to do with the thought catalog name. And it kind of brings in a debate of, well, you know, is the logo or the name of your website, is it an actual H1 tag? Is it a heading? We don't really have to get too semantic about it. You can either make it an H1 tag or not, but a lot of people do, and I think for our purposes, it also kind of makes it it makes it bigger, which also helps us see that it's one of the main things. And the other thing is that we're going to break down the about and the Twitter links. And those, you may not have thought about this, but we're going to use some tags that you may or may not be familiar with. But this is the UL tag and the LI tag. And the UL tag is an unordered list, and an LI tag is a list item. So when you think about it, what are those links? If you just look at them on the page, those are actually just a list of links. And an unordered list is actually kind of a part of the web developer's Swiss Army knife. A lot of different things can be represented as an unordered list. An ordered list is something, there is also an ordered list, which is an OL tag, and an ordered list is numbered. And so if something requires it to be in a certain order, or you would have a numbered step, then an ordered list would be something that you would use. But because this content isn't really something that has a set of steps that need to be taken, then we would use an unordered list. And here's the code again so that you guys can follow along. And it's just UL tags and LI tags, with the about and the Twitter as list items. And while you guys are getting this, well, I don't know if I should go into this or not, but there's kind of a newer HTML specification called HTML5, and in HTML5, list items don't have to have their closing tag, which is kind of nifty. It saves you from having to close that tag. But for now, we're going to keep closing all of our tags. Are you guys ready? All right. So the next thing that we're going to look at is obviously this next section. So how would we, looking at this section, there's a couple of distinct elements. There's the latest thought text. There's the image. There's the 25 people, my favorite album of all time. But what is that really? That's a tiny representation of an article. And so if we go back to our code, then, I think the thing that I'm pointing out here is that because there's two distinct sections, sorry, I hope I didn't lose you guys. So, because there's two distinct sections here, we need to encapsulate these some way. And another part of the web developer's Swiss Army knife, one of the general ways that we group things together is by using something called a div, which stands for divider. But it divides the page into blocks of content. So what we're going to start by doing is taking the code that we have and wrapping it in a div. So we go back to what we did have, and now then you can see how we added the div tags around it. And the indentation is optional. It's not required, but it helps with readability. And interestingly enough, in HTML, spaces have no meaning. So after the first space, other than the first space, they have no meaning. You could actually put in like one word, a million spaces, another word, and they would render like there was only one space.
Can you touch on why spaces do matter visually when it gets complex?
Yeah. So the question is, why do the spaces matter? That was from my mom. Shout out to my mom, who listens to the classes every week. The question is, why do the spaces matter? And I guess you're talking about like the indentation. Yeah. And the reason that I like to indent, and you should too, is that when you start working with a large document, it's kind of hard to think about where you've closed something. So if you look at the first div on this page, obviously right here we can see where the closing div is. But if, for instance, you had a lot of other content and you had maybe triple this content, then you could see how this closing div wouldn't be in the same like viewport of information. So the reason that we indent code is so that when you could open this div, do a lot of content, and then when you were ready to close it, you could follow the indentation down and figure out where you would close it. Does that answer your question? Awesome. So now that we have this wrapped in a div, to kind of group it together, because it's a collection of items, we're going to start by wrapping this other text in a div as well. So this gives us a really clean kind of layout to work with. We have one div, two divs, and this gives us two nice segments of code. The first thing that we should think about, just going top to bottom, which now might be a good time to point out that HTML is rendered top to bottom. So I guess it obviously makes sense if you played around with any, but something that you put at the top of a document is going to show up at the top, barring any CSS layouts. But the first thing that we're going to look at is the topmost item, which is this latest thought text. Sometimes text just doesn't really have, there isn't a tag that adequately describes what it is. Some people may look at this and say, oh, it's italic. We could use the EM tag. But I don't know if this is really text that's being emphasized, or rather, thought catalog is kind of, it has a really good design, so they probably just think it looks really nice. So with that said, there's not always going to be a tag that suits the meaning of what text is. So don't feel too bad if you have something and you don't know what it means. You can always go with a generic container. So what we're going to do now is wrap this latest thought text in a span tag. And if you remember from last week, a span tag was just a container for a generic span of text. And I'm kind of thinking, well, what are we going to do with the next text? I actually, when I was doing this class, I wouldn't think this much about the HTML, but I really wanted to be on point for this. So I was like, well, what would the appropriate tag be? And that's like, you've got first world problems if you're thinking about the appropriate tag. But I decided to go with a span tag. Even though this is actually the title of an article, I didn't think it would be appropriate to give it a heading tag. So H1 through H6. One of the reasons that I didn't really think it was appropriate is that linearly, as the page was being rendered, this tag came before what would be the title. So when you think about it, is it appropriate to have a secondary title before the first title? And I was kind of like, well, let's don't push the envelope. So anyway, so this text is wrapped in a span tag. And the other text, which is kind of just which is just like a short snippet from the article. I'm going to put it in a p tag because it's just normal paragraph text. And we're going to style it differently. Maybe not today, but we'll keep working with this document in the future classes. So we have our document, and I don't know if you've noticed this already, but when I took the screenshot, some of the stuff was different. So the text in the CodePen document is a little different from the screenshots. Don't worry. So anyway, what we haven't done, if you look at what you have on CodePen, what we haven't done, we have two blocks, we have two divs that each represent one of the two smaller segments of code, the top left and the top center, or top right, kind of, which is the thought catalog branding, and then the latest thought. So we have two divs that encapsulate both of those. But what we haven't done is encapsulated the entire header. So we're going to wrap this text, all of this text, in an opening and closing div. So now we're starting to see why it's good to indent. And I noticed this after the fact, but I forgot to put the image in there. So we'll go ahead and insert this image. Now the image, how would we insert an image? Some of you are thinking, oh, I know, the image tag. Keynote chose the wrong animation for me, but that is a great example of the incorrect way to do an image tag. I wonder what happened to my funny slide that corrected it. Anyway, so you all should know the correct way to do an image tag. So you have an image tag with a source attribute, and the value is the URL that I have there in the incorrect image tags. But anyway, what we do have now is a pretty big mess. It's getting better, but it's not exactly pretty. Kind of. Oh, okay. I'll grab a different image. Yeah, if you guys want to do kind of some extra in-class credit right now, you could just right-click on an image and do get image URL. I should have put the image URL in the CodePen text. But anyway, so we have this page that's still really ugly, but you can kind of see some structure coming to the document, and it's encouraging, to me at least. So now we're going to go to the next section, which is this actual article section. And in this section, there's a couple of subsections that I've identified. And I guess the first one that we're going to go over is this kind of the title of the article and the author and the date. So that may not jump out to you as, oh yeah, this would totally be a section or a collection of things. But when we start getting into HTML that's created dynamically, one of the things to think about are what, if you were going to lay this out, what content, how would you try and think about how to explain this? If I was going to create a blogging system, how would someone write their post? You'd probably have a field for a title, and you'd have a place for you to enter text for the article. And then when you wanted to render it, you would say, okay, well, let me come up with a place to put the title. And I know I want the title to be first, and then underneath it, I want the date and the author's name. And then I want, in this case, some like thought catalog, you'd say, well, and then I want the actual articles to be narrow. I want the titles to be full width, and I want the articles to be narrow. So that gives us this section up top, which is a full width section. So that's how we kind of came to that. And then you have the actual article, which is narrow. So that's why it gets its own kind of generic divider to get it into a code block. And let's see, going from these guys, the title is what we're going to be talking about now. And we'll see how this title section can be broken down. Well, we have the actual title, which should be simple enough. I bet everyone already knows how we're going to mark that up. But we also have the date and the author's name. So this is the code, or this is the text that's in your CodePen documents. And one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and wrap this in a div so that we go ahead and kind of denote it as a section. And then the title is going to be an H1 tag. And semantically, H1 tags are for the main, the main content or the main title of your page or article. So for instance, on say an e-commerce website, the main thing that it may have on each page is maybe the name of the product. So if the name of the product was Google Chromebook, maybe that goes in an H1 tag. I don't want to get too caught up in the semantics because in the end it really doesn't matter, but it's always nice to have something that's very meaningful, and then it kind of makes just always found that if it has meaning to you and you understand your decisions, then when you go back and you look at it, you're going to say, oh yeah, okay, I remember, like this is the main thing on this page, and that's why we made it an H1, because that's what you're supposed to do. So for the date, we're just going to wrap it in a span tag, which is, once again, just kind of a utility in part of our Swiss Army knife, how we're going to wrap text. And in this case, we're kind of thinking forward to using CSS. Could we have just put everything in one single span tag, and it would have been February 10th, 2014 by Aditi Ghosh? Yes, we could have. But looking forward to using CSS and looking at how Thought Catalog has the date in a different font style than, say, the name of the author, then that's why we end up wrapping the date itself in a span tag and also wrapping the author's name in a span tag as well. I kind of realized that could be a little confusing because it kind of jumps ahead a little bit, but I think the main takeaway is that the reason that we split those two out and put them in different span tags are so that we would have the ability to, say, target this particular text with CSS. And that is another class forward, but something that you should start becoming familiar with.
The span tag isn't going to act like a line break, right? It's
Right.
not going to put them on two separate lines. It's going to keep everything, all the text.
Right.
Sweet.
Right. So span tags are going to keep everything on the same line, and this brings up something that you may not understand now, but I do kind of want to mention, and we'll keep mentioning it until we do a full lesson on it. But there's a couple of different there are two classes of tags when you're working with HTML. Div tags belong to a set of tags that are called block elements, and block elements are tags that when you wrap them around content, a good way to think about it is that they automatically add a line break afterwards. And then the other subset of tags, which a span tag belongs to, is called inline tags. So inline tags are, well, they obviously derive their meaning from just being inline in, say, a paragraph of text, or inline in a block element. So when you're nesting tags, which is what we call it when you put tags inside tags, but as you nest tags, you never want to nest block elements inside inline elements. And one good way to not do that is to think about the meaning and the semantic meaning of the HTML. You would never end up wrapping or putting an H1 tag, which is a block level element, inside a span tag if you're thinking about the meaning of the HTML. So anyway, the span tag will not add a line break. But we're going to touch, there's a way longer discussion to be had on block level and inline elements. But for now, I think it would just be good for you guys to know that there are two types of elements, two subsets. And if you want to start familiarizing yourself with which tags fall into which subset, that would be a good thing to do. But the tags that we've worked with so far, images, span tags, like the emphasis tag, the strong tag, those are inline elements. And then divs, paragraphs. I think that's the main block level elements of H1 tags. Those are the main elements that we've worked with that are block level elements. So anyway, what we're going to do now is the code that we have, we're going to insert into, I don't know if you saw that. Okay, we'll go back and look at the insertion happening. We're going to go ahead and insert it into the code that we've been working with. So you should have the first block that we started with, and I've kind of commented this, but the first block that we started with, and then I opened another set of divs and then inserted what we just did into those. Another tangent, but also slightly related to this because I was thinking about it. It's really good for you guys to actually type things. I think it's one of the reasons why I didn't just post like a completed document, which is I was kind of thinking, man, I should have posted a document that way they wouldn't have to look at the screen and type. But it's good to get your fingers used to typing the angle brackets, typing the names of the tags, hitting the tab key for indentation, because that's the best way to learn. Copying and pasting is not as good. But anyway, you should have something that's a little bit, the document is getting a little bit more defined. It doesn't really look it. Still looks really bad. But if everyone could do it, then we wouldn't need this class. So I guess, yeah, you can kind of see we have our main title, how strangers can change our everyday lives. I was kind of hoping to be amazed by how readable the document was at the very end of the class. I don't know if I'm going to be amazed or not, but we'll see. Look at what Semantic Web does for you. So now what we're going to do is we're going to insert this image. So at the very beginning of the post, what we have is an image, and then we have the attribution text underneath. And I have given that to you in the CodePen document. And we're going to go ahead and convert my little pseudo HTML stuff into real HTML. So we're going to go ahead and this is the correct image tag, which was oddly missing from a couple of slides ago. We're going to change that URL to an image tag with a source attribute. And the attribution text is going to be a link. So have we talked about anchor tags? No. It's kind of funny because anchor tags are pretty much like the very foundation of the web. An A tag, which is an anchor, it is a hyperlink. It's what you click on. It's a link. And initially, at least, pretty much all the web was just a collection of documents that linked to each other. And not all links end up going off of a page. For instance, you can create what's called a named anchor. And you could, I don't know if you've ever seen web pages, probably this is mostly used in an FAQ. But in an FAQ for a website, there's typically a lot of questions like, what happens if my order is damaged? What happens when will my order ship? And then you click on it and it kind of scrolls down the page and shows you the answer. And those are accomplished using anchor tags, which is the A tag, which we have here. But the A tag supports an attribute called name. So you can create a named anchor. So I don't have a slide for this, but to create a named anchor, you would just use href, and that's href, and we should probably talk about that too. But then you would just use the £sign and the name of another tag. This is complicated to explain without a slide. Wish I would have made one now. Such a great topic. So hopefully you've had a chance to do that. And we're going to wrap those in a div. And just because the image and attribution text all kind of exists as one object, or one main point, we're going to wrap it in a div, and then looking forward to styling it with CSS. It's also going to give us the ability to target those two specific items and style them visually. And we're going to insert this into our second block. Now we're kind of getting a pretty long page. So this is what we have so far. So where are we? What's this look like? If all the links worked and the images existed, you would have something that kind of looked like this. And after this is over, I'm going to end up posting a completed HTML page so everyone can get caught up. But this is kind of starting to look like the article. I'm not that convinced. It's still pretty ugly. We're getting closer. But I think that's how, it's crazy to think that before CSS existed, the web was pretty ugly. And that's, I guess it's not too hard to imagine why only academics were using it. I mean, anything that didn't require, or that didn't require too much like visual, like any kind of like visual treatments was ideal for the web. So research papers are like the #1 thing. So anyway, we still have a very ugly document. So now what we're going to do is we're going to wrap all the paragraphs in p tags. The p tag is a block level element, which means that we can wrap those paragraphs. We don't need to put it in a div or anything. And so one of the, an example paragraph I just have here, we're just going to insert p tags. Man, it's great to hear just a lot of typing going on. And you can, when you insert your p tags, the formatting that I have the p tags just inside the second block. So, sorry. When I say second block, I'm referring to the second block comment that I have right there. But you have as far as indentation levels go, you have the two main components, the header and the actual article. And inside the div that contains the article, at the very bottom goes the p tags. And you can just insert those one right after the other. I'll give you guys a chance to do that. Have you guys mostly finished wrapping the paragraphs? I should have someone come up here and like let me see their computer as they do everything, and then I can get a good like sense for timing. I'm gonna come look at someone's computer. I have one every now and then. Okay, so there's one last piece. There's actually a little bit more at the bottom of this page that I kind of skipped over because I didn't feel like it added very much to this lesson. But there are article tags. And one reason that I wanted to get these article tags in, and tags are just the way that they put little snippets of information at the bottom. It's kind of crazy how that evolved. It used to be a blog thing. At the end of your post, you put like what was the topic of this, and you'd put hashtag. Whatever. A lot of people would put the tags with hashtags at the bottom of their blog posts, and then you see this like behavior carried over to Twitter, and now all of a sudden you see hashtag Super Bowl, GoDaddy domain at the bottom of an article, and you're like, man, all this stuff happened because people were marking up their documents semantically, and they create different ways of getting information out. Anyway. So tags at the bottom of the article, how should we mark those up? The plain text is, of course, in the code pen, but it's just, this article is tagged acquaintances, friends, inspirational life lessons. This is like Talk Catalog 101. What are all the articles tagged? So you might be thinking, man, I've got the perfect idea for how I'm going to mark this up. Just talk all about the span tag. And to be honest, you could get away with doing something like this. That's not how we're going to look at the world. There's actually a phrase that people use called tag soup, and it's when you see like HTML that someone's marked up, and pretty much the only tags that they use are like spans and divs. There's no actual meaning to the document. They've just kind of marked it up as they saw fit, so that they could style it. So we're going to try. I guess the best advice I can give, the best advice is to just be pragmatic. Really, if it works, it's fine, but try to use the most specific tag possible and then go more generic as you see fit. But with that said, what we're going to be using are lists. Well, we're going to wrap it in a paragraph tag that is not closed, and then use an unordered list. So when you look at those tags on the page, you're probably not thinking that's a list, because we're all really used to like bullet pointed lists. And you'll actually find that when you start using unordered lists, that the default behavior is to actually give them a bullet point. And if you use an ordered list, the default behavior is to give the ordered list a number 1 through however many list elements you have. But when you think more abstractly and think, given what we've been given what the HTML gods gave us, Tim Berners-Lee and Mark Andreessen, what do I have at my disposal? What could possibly give this collection of items more meaning and kind of the agreed upon set of tags that we've come on for a lot of things are unordered lists? Yes.
Why are you ending the bullet points for every single one?
Do you mean closing the li tags?
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, why am I closing the li tags? I really don't have to, as long as I'm using HTML5. I'm pretty sure of that. I'd have to double check. But for the most part, it's good to just continue to close the tags. There are some if you did something a little bit more advanced and you didn't close the tag, you could probably wind up with a rendering problem. And especially now for you guys, it's probably easiest to think about it as tags are either self-closing or you need to close them, and there isn't a self-closing tag that modifies information that isn't an attribute, if that makes sense. So that's fine. But anyway, we have our unordered list, which you can think of as a list of tags. And I wrap that in a p tag, just to give it a block level container around the tag. And then I also forgot to close my p tag. But that's what happens when I have to write code in Keynote, and I have to manually syntax highlight it myself. So, yeah, one of the big things that I wanted to get out of this is to see the world in lists. So we started out with these two pretty simple examples. We have the 2 links at the top of the page, and I said those could be viewed as a list of links. The tags at the bottom of the page, and I said that those could be viewed as like an unordered collection of tags. But think about this scenario. If you look at the bottom of the Thought Catalog article, you'll see that there's actually like Thought Catalogs recommended for you articles, and you'll see a collection of articles. So then think, would it be possible to mark those up in a way that you're using an unordered list? Because that collection of articles could probably be semantically represented as an unordered list of items. So I think one of the things that I hope everyone gets out of this before we get to the assignment is to start looking at the web pages that you go on every day and think about how would you make this? What structure would you give it? Granted, it's a little bit hard right now because you guys don't know CSS, or at least we haven't covered it. So you may look at something and say, well, but if I did an ordered list, it would totally look different. And it would, but we can pretty much change anything to look any way that we want. But just start thinking about it. If you go on Facebook and you're looking at the images, that album is actually probably best represented as an unordered list because it's a collection of images. The person's name on their Facebook profile is probably best represented as an H1. Facebook's logo, they probably use image substitution, but it's probably an H1 that's substituted for an image at the top. Facebook source code is probably like modified by JavaScript after runtime, so you can't see it. So I could say anything I want right now. You guys can't see it. But anyway, the assignment is what I just kind of already went over, but is to check out a page, look at its structure, just start looking at things and seeing how would I break this down? How would I make, what would be like a good set of items? Like what would make a good like divider to divide this into blocks of items? And then further narrow down the page into how you think you would mark it up. So just start thinking about that and thinking about how, kind of top to bottom, how people are doing things. It'll actually be pretty cool, I think, when Thursday, we're going to take the page that we've gone over and apply some like very simple CSS styles to it, and you'll be like, wow, we got bot catalog from nothing. Anyway, does anybody have any questions? It was probably kind of hard to keep up, and so I would be very shocked if there wasn't at least one question.
When we divided the date and the author, and you said to separate them, those verbs,
Mm-hmm.
And you said you could just put them in one bracket, but later on, I'm assuming then when we're doing CSS stuff, to have them separated, it's easier to like tag things on when they're separated. Is that what you meant by that, kind of? Like it's easier to build on
Right.
later
Right.
if you have them separated?
So, Mom, the question is, did we separate those span tags solely for CSS purposes? And the answer is yes.
Okay.
All of this talk of semantic markup, and I'm separating stuff for CSS. But that's just me going back and forth. Someone else have a question?
Yeah. So on the very beginning, we had thought catalog and about the Twitter and the other article. How do you get them instead of top to bottom side by side?
So that's actually accomplished with just a little bit of CSS. So it's good to, yeah, it's definitely, that's probably, I would have guessed, the number one question, which was if the items are, when they're rendering right now, they're on top of each other, how can we make them be side by side? But yeah, that's just a little bit of CSS and accomplished pretty easily. But I think one thing that having said that we can do pretty much anything with CSS, I think that CSS is applied to elements easier when we think about them as like logical chunks, like grouping elements that are similar or that are going to be kind of styled in the same group, which tends to be semantic, if that makes sense. So that's why we grouped them together in the header, was so that we could style the header as one thing.
When I was looking and everything, and you don't do, or like there weren't any spaces, like if it's easier for my eyes to like have a space between a break or something like that in the next paragraph, is that gonna make a difference in the long run? Is that like people don't like that, or?
No. So the question is there a reason that I had no spaces in all my code? No, that's really just some people like their code to be a little bit more spaced out. Some people like it to be more condensed. My personal preference is that I like my stuff to be condensed, and some people are like, man, that's really weird. But yeah, it's just a personal preference. And in HTML, at least, after the first space, subsequent spaces don't mean anything, which kind of becomes there are some interesting, like, sometimes you want like 4 spaces or something. How do you do that? We'll cover that too, but what else? Anything else? Some people like scratching their heads and throwing them out. Okay, cool. Well, I hope you guys just kind of start looking around, enjoying the web, and just thinking like, man, I can totally build this stuff. Because you're going to be close.